Hey guys, it's Josh. Today I'm going to be working on a Honda CRV 2003. I'm going to be replacing the condenser and radiator cooling fans. So before we get started though, if this video is useful to you at the end, go ahead and subscribe to it. It helps us out a lot. But let's get started on this job. Alright, so we're going to be replacing the condenser fan and the radiator cooling fan, which are set in here right up against the condenser and radiator, believe it or not. And what's nice about this car is it has this removable cross member. So if we look under here, we can actually remove this section here and pull it out, which is going to reveal the fans and the radiator. If you're just doing one or the other, condenser or radiator fan, it's essentially the same job. In my case, I'm going to be replacing both of them. Alright, so first thing is removing this plastic cover here with these little tabs. Take a little screwdriver, pop up the center. Once the center is out, then the outer section just lifts right out. Don't try to grab these with pliers and just rip them out, otherwise you'll be buying new ones. Probably like this guy did beforehand, and now they're gone forever. We've got a battery bracket bolt that's holding our battery bracket on top of this plastic trim piece. So right now this should come right out. Our goal ultimately is getting this cross piece off. So anything that's attached to it, we've got to remove. So that's how you do that. So once this bracket piece is out of the way, that will then enable you to get down to another 10mm right below it. Do the same on the other side, except I'm not going to drop this one. Get the one underneath it. So I'm just going to remove these two 10mm bolts holding this air scoop. That bolt's loose from the cross member, but it's stuck in that rubber bracket. I'm just going to leave it there. So it looks like we got most of the stuff up here removed from this cross member. There's a bar that goes straight down to the frame behind here that we have to remove at the bottom. What we need to do to access the bottom of this frame piece is remove this whole plastic part on the bottom, and that just means like a whole bunch of these little plastic clips that we did on top. Just repeat that like 17 more times. If you do break a bunch of these, generally you can go to an automotive store and find a generic version of them to replace the ones that break. There's even one way up here by the shock you got to pull out. Right here, there's a joint between two plastic parts, and there's actually a little part here that you have to pop out like that. The front seam of this plastic underside that actually connects with the bumper has two more clips, two more little clippy deals, and then it's got a couple 10mm bolts. Sometimes if stuff's starting to strip out, if you put a little pressure on it, it can help. In this case, I'm going to get lucky, I think. There we go. One of those. So now this pulls down. Okay. All that work for this bolt right here. Okay. A lot of times they attach the wiring harnesses with little zip ties or little clips. So you got to kind of try to free those up or unplug them so that you can pull that piece out. Looking up in here, it looks like I've got this coolant temperature sensor right here. I'm just going to push the little tab at the top, wiggle a little bit, and unplug that. That's right there. Then I can see also the wiring harness for the condenser fan is right here. you push the little tab on the right. So that's the harness connector for the fan on this side. Okay, I'm going to come do the same thing up here. I'm just going to take a look-see. This is actually the fan harness. The one down there looks like it went to something else. So I've disconnected that again to get out of your way. So I'm going to come up on the left, come up on the right. Okay, so now that we've got this lifted up a little bit, we have access to the wiring harness that's attached inside underneath this crossbar. Just get your mom's pair of needle nose pliers, and these little clips here you just kind of squeeze together and shove it in. That'll release it. Poke it back in the hole. Squeeze those little tabs together. You've got one here that is going to be real tricky to get to. You can see you can't even access it. So what I'm going to do is break it. So I'm just going to grab the clamp, make sure you're not grabbing any wires, and just twist it out. When I'm putting everything back, if I feel like that's really loose and going to be a problem, I can always zip tie it to something later on. And as you can see, that allows us to bring this up. Okay, we're still attached down here on these points, which I could release if I want, but honestly I don't like having to deal with those because sometimes they break when you're ripping them off. So as much as I can leave, I will leave. So for this coolant reservoir, 10mm here at the top, and we're just going to disconnect the coolant reservoir hose from this fitting at the radiator cap. This just pulls off. I'm actually going to bend this over. There's a 10mm bolt that holds this on down below. I'm going to cheat. I'm just going to bend this out of the way. It's pretty flexible metal. It's pretty thin, so it's going to go back okay. It's better than having to wrestle with that bolt way down inside there. The easiest way with this is give it a little twist. Twist this way, and it'll allow you to kind of work it past some of the AC lines. Somebody hasn't been keeping an eye on their levels. Now for this condenser fan, I've got two 10mm bolts at the top. That wiring plug that I disconnected at the bottom, looks like it's got a little zip tie still attaching it to the fan at the bottom. So I'm going to set this back down. I'm going to go down there and cut that. So this is one of these little plastic clip jobbies, really designed to go on one way. Really tough to get out in a cramped situation. So I'm just going to cut this and zip tie it later. Be very careful when you're cutting. Obviously don't cut your sensor wire. So what I often do is I'll just take little tiny snips of it. There we go. Free all the way. Then we can go back up. Alright, if you are just doing the radiator fan and not the condenser, or if you were like me doing both of them, a little trick here is if you take out the condenser fan first, get it out of the way, you are able to slide the radiator fan out and up without having to deal with this radiator hose, which I really like because I don't want to have to drain the radiator, have coolant spilling everywhere in order to do this. If I can avoid that, I'm going to slide this fan out underneath that hose and leave the cooling system intact. Okay, now that that sensor is fully disconnected from our condenser fan down below, this just pulls right out. Before you pull the radiator fan out, there's this electrical harness connection. Sometimes these old wiring connections can be a bear, and I find that if I kind of play around with them and actually push them together tight and wiggle them around, it kind of breaks them loose a little bit, so that when I do push that tab down and pull, they sometimes come out a little easier. Okay, in this case I actually had to get needle nose pliers in it to push that tab right there on top, push down and pulled out. It was kind of awkward for my hand, so if you have a pair of angled nose, needle nose, that's great. Otherwise, just try to work a pair of pliers down in there. Alright, once we have the wiring connection broken loose, 2 bolts at the top, we lift the fan up, break it loose from its little seats at the bottom, no fasteners, just sitting, and we're going to slide it to the side. Okay, so the fan has the 2 tabs at the top and the 2 at the bottom that sit in their holes, and the one on the bottom right and the one on the top right, they hit hoses when you're trying to scoot this thing over to the left. So what I found works is getting the bottom right tab over the transmission cooling line by just kind of pulling on this top left corner of the whole fan and getting it over like this. Boom. Do a little spin, and then it loosens it up for the top right to clear. And then you just got to wrestle it past some little fittings. There we go. Okay, so if you get mixed up along the way, you have this 7-bladed fan. Usually goes to your condenser, and your 5 to your radiator. So for this fan on this vehicle, I watched it. When the AC turned on, it would just turn slowly like this, not at the correct speed. So I know for sure this is bad. The radiator fan wasn't going on, and so I'm going to actually test that now, now that it's out of the car. But I'm assuming that this fan is bad as well. Let's do a quick and dirty test. If you got a set of jumper cables around, those work. What I'm going to do is attach them to my car battery as if I'm going to jumper her. If I'm going to jump the car, obviously just as you are with jumping cars, don't touch your leads together or you're going to get lots of sparks. Then what I do is I take the other 2 ends and I grab a screwdriver so that I get pokey ends on them. Again, don't touch these together, and don't let your positive one, don't lose track, don't let your positive one touch any body of parts of the car or anything that's going to ground it, or you're going to get a bunch of sparks. So I'm going to do positive lead to my red wire. I can actually see the color of the wires on the back side of the clip here, and my negative lead to my black wire. If yours has funny colors or you can't tell what the colors are, you'll know by the direction of the fan. If you mix them up, it's just going to spin backwards. So it's a little tricky. You want to work these in without touching them, and I got nothing. If this were to start spinning nice and fast and strong, then I would know fan's good, something's going on with my circuitry and the rest of the car, and I can work that way. We're going direct to the battery and the fan is not spinning. It's a broken fan. If you've got all your tools out anyway, probably a good idea, check your new fan as well. Just to make sure that your new part is good. You'd hate to put it in and find out you have the one bad part and have to do this all over again. Okay, so I have my replacement fans. As always, good idea just to double check that you have the right part. Making sure these pins at the bottom that go in the holes are the same as your old one. So make sure the bolt holes line up. Make sure your wiring plug is intact. Some don't come with the right plugs. So you got to make sure that's correct. So that one looks good. Radiator fan. My pins are the same. Bolt holes are the same. Wiring harness is in the same place. All looks good. I've tested these and they spin fine. So let's go ahead and install them. You may be able to get some budget mechanic savings if you go and just buy the fan motor. I looked around locally and they were exact same price to buy this whole assembly as it was to replace just the motor and reuse the fan blade and housing. Perhaps if you go online you could find a motor cheaper than you could an assembly, and that may be a way to save a couple bucks. However, the installation is going to be exactly the same. You're not going to skip any steps. You're still going to have to remove this. All that's going to be different is then once you get your assembly off, you would remove this bolt, take your fan blade off. You'd then have access to 3 screws in the back, and you'd pop your motor out, put your new motor in, attach your old fan blade, and the rest of the process would be the same. Install your radiator fan first, and again, these pins are going to go down. The fan is going to face forward, okay? And you're going to slide this in opposite of the way that you pulled the old one out. So obviously first I want to put the pins at the bottom their holes. And once those pins go in the bottom, then this should suck up right to the radiator. As you remember, I had to use needle nose pliers to get this plug off, but usually it's something you can do by hand. Listen for that nice little click. Condenser fan. Little pins go down. Line them up on both sides. There we go. So we're going to put this reservoir back in. See this little tab at the bottom? There's a tab in the fan assembly. You just want to make sure that that finds its way into that slot at the bottom. You may find it easier to go down, actually. There we go. Boom. Okay, don't forget your reservoir tube has to reconnect to this fitting by the radiator cap. Push them through and they catch again. If you broke them, just run a zip tie through that hole and hold it. The main thing is that this thing doesn't flop down and get caught in a fan while it's running. This is the one that was on the back side. I'm going to sneak this underneath these clamps here to make sure that these little trim tabs are free, that they get back to their original position. You don't get trapped underneath. Alright, so here's the bottom of that brace. While I'm down here, I'm going to re-hook up this coolant sensor. Listen for that click. Alright, you also have this, as you remember, which I'm going to connect above these hoses though. Alright, as you recall, this was the wire that had the big plastic clip that I just cut. And so this would be where you could zip tie it back to like part of the fan or something. Looking at it, I think it's okay. I don't think it's going to get caught in the fan at any point, and it's not going to lay on anything like an exhaust or anything that's hot that's going to melt it. I think it's going to be fine the way it is, so I'm just going to leave it. We got one last electrical connection that we have to put back, and that's for your condenser fan itself. This wire here that was hanging on this cross member, now we can connect into our plug. Make a really good check before this plastic piece goes back on. You want to just take a good look down there, make sure there's no wires hanging loose and unconnected before you get back into this. Let's go ahead and reattach this air scoop. Okay, I'm now going to go ahead and begin the process of reconnecting this cross member on Saturday. You want to give these a pretty good crank. This is a pretty integral part of your car that's holding up a lot of important stuff. So make sure these are nice and snug. Okay, don't forget that there's a bolt underneath these trim brackets. I just had them in position to make sure that they would fit. But go back underneath and make sure you install those bolts. Get your plastic piece, put it on correctly. Don't put it on backwards. Now that you got your plastic on, reinstall your battery bracket. So when you're reinstalling these plastic clips, so you want to pull the center out of the middle, and then you just shove that into the hole, and then you shove the center back in, and that spreads the tangs at the back, which holds it in. Put the outers in. Alright. Okay, so this, the only trick is you want to start at the front and make sure this lip is underneath the bumper. So you want to kind of shove this all the way underneath it. You want to start from this front edge. Get in there. Alright. So just like when I was taking them off, I'm applying pressure to the backside. I will tell you right now, this trim piece is the most frustrating part of the whole process. Okay, a million little clips. So if you're missing a few of these clips, it's not the end of the world. Just make sure you prioritize these side flaps by the wheels so that you don't risk getting it caught in the tire and ripping it off. And then you can just get replacements for these at any auto parts store. Last thing you want to do is test your fans. So best way probably is to drive around a little bit, get your engine up to temperature. Usually it's the halfway mark, whatever your normal operating temperature is. Stop the car, leave it running, and check under your hood. Your radiator fan should be running to keep the car cool when it's not going at full speed. Alternatively, turn on your AC. Your condenser fan usually comes on right away with your AC running. Make sure that's good. And then once you confirm they're good, then you can clean up your tools. Thanks for watching. If this helped you out, please subscribe.